Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you see a link down below, you can click on it and you'll end up in Zoom. See another link there, and you click on that, you'll end up in Mukana, and that's where you become a producer of the show. You actually run the show from your home. You don't have to come in anywhere. You don't have to sign in or have access cards. You're the producer. And you really define the whole show. So what you ask and what you vote on is what we're going to talk about. So it's really, really important for you to jump in there and ask questions and vote on those questions. We open the doors at 6 o'clock. You can come in if you want to be part of the panel, if you think you can actually answer the questions and you want to just see how it's working, see what it's like to be here. Come in at 6 or after. But you need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to be part of the panel. So you have to be here. We have to do a mic check with you, and so you need to be here early. From 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, we have general questions, whatever question you have around media or virtual production. And then at 8 o'clock, we do something that we're all kind of interested in something specific. Today, we're going to talk about AWS. There's a lot of interest in AWS. A lot of people here, a lot of discussion going on. So a lot of us are trying to figure out how we can move a lot of our production into the cloud. So today will be a discussion about how to do that. And so get your questions in. Make sure to tag them. If you have a question about AWS, make sure to tag it as AWS in Mukana. Then tomorrow, second 2 hours are actually going to be about education. We're now digging deep, working on a plan we actually might be able to execute. We're not going to stream it to YouTube, so just know that the stream tomorrow will end at 8 as we go into the education. You can still join, anybody can come in, but we're just not going to put it on YouTube. So, and then later in the afternoon, we'll have Matt in the kitchen. Matt in the kitchen is watch us build up the show, get ready for it. 5 o'clock is when the show actually happens. And then from 6 to 6:30, or starting somewhere in there, we'll do a post-mortem of whenever we're finished with it about what happened and how it worked. It's really, really an incredible education opportunity if you're interested in listening to a live event get executed. Nate Hill is actually the TD, and he's been doing this for a while, and he's pretty good at it. So it's really, really worth listening to. So stay tuned for that. Also a reminder that we put out in the email that you get every morning, we put out a call for people who want to be part of our production teams that want to learn a little bit more and be part of the process. You can go ahead and fill that out, and we'll get back to you probably as early as next week. We're planning to basically build up our capacity for the show. Starting next week, you're going to start seeing some of the radical changes that we're executing. So we're going to be, the second hour will look a lot more like a produced show, and eventually the first hour as well. And so over the summer, there's going to be a lot of push to do a lot of different things. And so there's a lot of opportunity, everything from I just want to help organize things, I want to help produce, I want to help do video or graphics. All those things are possible. So if you're interested in being part of that program, you just fill out the form, and again, we'll get back to you, and it will be soon. So we've got a lot to do. All right, let's jump into the questions, Guy. What do we got?
First one's coming in from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. What's the lowest cost yet effective way to do a one-person remote show outdoors on Zoom?
I would say a phone, with a good audio interface. So we've done a lot of phone rigs in the past. So the main thing is you need to find an effective way to get the phone into your, and there's iRig makes a variety of things. Saramonic makes a variety of interfaces for your microphones. And then you can decide whether you're going to do some kind of, a wireless or wired. The main thing is getting good audio. So if you can get good audio in there, the phone can hold its own on a Zoom pretty effectively. And I'd say if you're talking the lowest cost but effective, I would lean towards the phone. Go ahead, Tony.
Yes, I would say a low cost, sort of piggybacking on what you're saying, Alex, is Cinemaker. It is not the best in terms of the use of the Wi-Fi as the streaming platform, but it is a good solution. It is low cost.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, as a single person, because part of this is as a one-person remote show, I don't know if you would need Cinemaker. And my only concern as a one-person show would be that you, the challenge there is mostly having to think about too many things at one time. So you kind of want to have a camera up. But Cinemaker is we had them on a week ago, and they're it's really cool though. Yeah, absolutely. Jeffrey?
It might be a good idea to also have a tablet with cellular access, either on that same network or on a different network. That way, if you have any problems, you can switch it out. Plus, you can actually set it up for the panel on the tablet and then use the phone for recording.
Yep. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Steve Erickson in Hamilton, Massachusetts. I'm interested to learn more about the role of producer in event production. Could the panel describe the various jobs that a producer does before and during a show? What are the differences between the different levels of producer, executive, associate, assistant, etc.?
I think all of us define them differently. Go ahead, Liberty.
Everything. You want to make sure that the crew is together. You've got all the logistics with the client or whatever the project is, all the nitty gritty. That's when I look at a producer, is just making sure those finer details are taken care of.
Usually the way we think of executive producers is we have a producer that works with us that is kind of overseeing, an executive producer is overseeing many projects. They may be looking at the 3 or 4 or 5 projects that we have in some various forms of development. They're not hands-on in those. They might be helping in certain areas, but they're basically just keeping track of them all. Then a producer is typically someone working on that specific project, and they're working through that, that project to make sure that it's that's going to be successful. And then usually we don't really have associate producers. We have coordinators, and those coordinators are working on specific pieces of that puzzle. And that might be, for instance, managing. For a virtual event, everybody has to be prepped. Everybody, we spend somewhere between a half an hour and an hour and a half with literally every person that's going to appear. We send out kits, so there's kits that need to be built. We have run of shows, we have graphics, we have all those things. And so the producer has to pay attention to all of those things, but typically they have coordinators, EICs, engineers, and so on and so forth below them that are executing those, and their job is to pull it all together. Go ahead, Sky, and then Courtney.
Well, as a former editor, now executive producer, I think the job is to make things happen and to be responsible and help carry the vision for the different departments. And as what I've been explained to me, is you can't have too many producers, but you also do need to have a clear vision of what is being expected of the different departments. Okay. So an audio department, the video department, the graphics department, the talent, the scheduling, the promotions, the marketing, and then if you're doing a series of things, which we're happily doing at Mad in the Kitchen, is what does next week look like, and who is the talent that needs to be queued up, and the hardware and the things that need to make happen. So a producer is to make a thing happen and all of the details inside of it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex has done a beautiful job of describing what an actual producer does. You have to be careful because today in credits, producer credits are handed out like candy. And if you look at the normal network television show may have 12 to 15 different people with producer in their title. And maybe only 1 or 2 of them are actual producers. They hand out that title to actors who have control of a show and showrunners and so on, and writers. Anybody who has a financial stake in a movie or a television show these days, a lot of times will get an executive producer, co-executive producer, co-producer.
It's like Oprah. You get a producer role, and you get a producer role.
Everybody gets a producer.
It used to be more of an executive producer was usually when people were connected to money, but I think that they finally realized that most of us relate to executive producers as someone who didn't do anything, and so then they had to move down the path. Soon they'll be listed as actors somewhere in there. Like I was part of that film, because we'll stop paying attention to producers, So it just depends. Yeah. All right. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. How serious is the miracles, and that's spelled with a 1 for the people listening at home, miracles vulnerability found in the M1 chip?
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
It's not serious at all from a practical perspective. There are easier ways to hack a machine than to have 2 coordinating. So what it is basically 2 processes can steal memory or communicate with one another through a specific register in a processor, and they can create a communication channel that's 2 bits wide. And so in theory, sure, you could exfiltrate data, you can do a bunch of things, but you can do that anyway, right? There's the security implications are basically the same as any other malware. Yeah.
Go ahead, TJ.
The person who found the leak, Hector Martin, basically all the press release and everything he did was mostly a parody of a lot of the vulnerabilities that have like graphics and logos and everything made. So yes, it is a vulnerability. It's nothing to worry about. And a lot of it was done as a parody.
Go ahead, Peter.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. When I read through the articles and then read the interview with him, he was doing this to pull Apple's chain.
Okay, go ahead, Paul, real quick.
Yeah, it can Rickroll you. Don't ask me what that means. I just read an article that said that.
Rickroll. Yeah, we click. I wish I had that queued up. I would have said this is what it actually can do, and then we would just pass you right to a Rickroll. All right, next question.
Next one's coming in from our friend Tlaloc Miguel Lopez Waterman in New York. For those of you who have used 4G cellular for Zoom and streaming, what are your setups? I will likely be working out of my travel trailer this summer.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
We use the MoFi modem with the SIM from the guys at netbuddy.co. And they just rolled back, as far as I understand, I haven't checked in a couple of weeks, but they just rolled back new offerings that for a while there. What they were selling was an unlimited AT&T access, and it truly is unlimited. I've put over 400 gigs through it 1 month, so I know it's unlimited, and it never throttled. That is just a single modem. If you really need dependability, LiveView, without a doubt.
I think he's just general connectivity, but definitely look at them. Yeah, definitely some bigger. You want to look for antennas and structure, not just the MiFi. To kind of build that out.
Yeah, this is MoFi. MoFi. It's the actual modem, and it does have great antennas, right. And that's why I really recommend them. Right. They pull in signal from like ever, and you also could put an external antenna on it. We have those on all our trucks.
That's great. And Jeff, you're coming in just a little low. Next question.
Next one's coming in from James in Dublin, Ireland. I'm looking for a capable Ethernet switch for my mobile setup. What would you recommend? And he has a note here that he's not using NDI at the moment, but would like to have that as an option in the future. Go ahead, Jeff. Oh, can't hear you. So you went from quiet to...
It was extra low. The MikroTik is a very cost-effective solution to jump into. Run Switch OS though. There's a lot of them that can run dual OSs, so Router OS or Switch OS. So SWOS, run that, and you could actually do a lot of damage with those little boxes for under like $200. So that's great switches.
Next question.
Next one's coming in from Carmi Vineswig in Redondo Beach, California. Apple announced a deal with University of Nevada, Reno to provide an iPad Air, an Apple Pencil, and a Keyboard Folio to every student. They also plan to provide training and some software to the faculty. Thoughts?
Apple should do more of that. So like that is their way back in. Go ahead, Laura.
I agree with you, but also I would want an actual external keyboard if those kids are going to be typing full papers on those.
I think they have it's the Folio, so they have a lap. There's a keyboard. It's just not the big heavy one, which is really nice, I have to say. Yeah, I think that Apple needs some success stories. They really lost a lot of ground. I mean, I think Apple's big challenge specifically is that the fleet management when the iPad first came out was a disaster. And Google was able to leverage that. And Google has also built really, really great nuts and bolts of just running a class. And so I think that's been the problem is that it's easy. And then the Chromebooks have been reasonably good with keyboards and so on and so forth. I think Apple needs to do a lot more of that at almost all ages to A, figure out how to make those effective, and B, to have success stories that they can show to other schools. And so I think that hopefully they'll do more of that. That's the only way back in. Like Apple has a better product than the Chromebooks, significantly better than the Chromebooks. And from the point of view that we have to remember that in the West, at least, and definitely in the United States, the creative class at all different levels is going to be the only one that really has mobility, has upward process and everything else. That's going to be one of the biggest parts of our industry, not the only part, but one of the largest ones. And so it's really important that we move students beyond, multiple choice tests, and move them into understanding how to create, how to problem solve, how to express themselves, because at many, many, many different levels, that's going to be the differentiating factor. We're looking at a huge shift in our country where people at the top can move anywhere and make a good living. People, but people not at the top are going to have a harder and harder time, and that people at the top is going to be very connected to their ability to create at some level or problem solve. And because otherwise we can send it somewhere else in the world. So we just have to understand that that's what makes it different. And so it's really, really important that we look at Apple products, but Apple has to prove it. And this is going to be the way, hopefully one of the ways that they do that. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Jim Hankins in Chesterfield, Michigan. I have recently changed my audio chain from an XR18 Air to an X32 Rack. What is the panel's recommendation using this setup to reduce fan noise?
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
I want to know a little bit more about what the actual environment is that they're using it in. But if it's a really noisy situation as far as the fans in the X32 rack and their head amp, if they're using the remote stage rack, one really good idea would be to get an X-Touch and just run an Ethernet cable to the X-Touch. You've got full control over everything. And then the rack can be in an equipment closet, can be anywhere.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so actually the X32 rack's in a server enclosure, so it's actually the computers here. So I'm talking via an SD16 stage box. So it's just a computer or two, and occasionally an HVAC kicking on. And
so the fan noise is not from the X32; it's from all the other things.
That's right. Yeah, my environment versus the X32 itself. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Victor.
I'll give you the expensive solution, and that's to get a MixPre 6.2 and buy noise, and then come out of that into one of the channels of the X32.
That's arriving on the doorstep today. So okay, so you just justified it for me, yeah. and it's preserved for posterity. So
it's my pleasure.
It works really well. And the next, the dedicated is actually more expensive. What's interesting is the MixPre 2, the MixPre will compete pretty heavily with the Cedar box, and the Cedar would be the thing that we would typically put in as hardware. And that Cedar, a 2-channel Cedar box is like $4,000. So it's, but those are the best. I mean, you can use gates and you can use a lot of other things, but live noise reduction done well is difficult. Now with Zoom, its noise reduction is actually pretty good on its end. But if you want it as a general purpose solution, I think you're going the right direction. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Jonas.
And if that is a PR40 in front of you, which it seems to be, they work a lot better if you put them directly in front, pointing right down the old mouth hole, and get you a pop filter. Because coming across the front of it, as you have it now, I think you get a lot less signal-to-noise ratio off of it than if it's directly in front of you.
Yeah, you can close that distance a little bit, or put it underneath and go up, because I've got a soft area above me. So when I just push it up into there. Go ahead, Jonas.
Are there any Dante or BSS 806 plugins you could use instead of routing it through a MixPre?
Somehow I knew you were going to bring that up. Probably. Maybe you'll find one for me.
Okay.
They're not as effective as those two. I mean, the clear leaders right now for live noise reduction is the Noise Assist and Cedar. And we've tested a lot of them because we didn't want to, before when it was just Cedar, we tested a lot of things. That's why we jump on the Noise Assist and say, oh, it's not that expensive, because we spent a lot of money trying to find a better noise reduction solution to that. And I would say that Cedar was clearly ahead for a long time, and now it's pretty even between the two. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Carmi Vineswig, and he asks, with Zoom adding support for center stage, what is the chance that an iPad Pro would work by itself or with an external microphone and headphones as a good base system for Zoom meetings? Has anyone here tried it yet?
I haven't. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so the other day I actually tried, I would like to move my entire Zoom setup, ATEM, camera, and attach it just right into the iPad and control it there. But I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, I cannot select a different camera or input for that at the moment within the Zoom iPad app itself. Now I have heard that they might change that, but for me, that would be a great thing. I can move the entire setup, mix pre, ATEM, and camera to that and control it there. That would be just a great mobile setup for me.
Next question.
Another one coming in from Carmi. What would there be interest in some kind of office hours member-led group classes / project lab-oriented sessions to learn about Level Up with some other software that would be useful for production? And he has some examples of Cinema 4D, Blackmagic Fusion, Resolve, FCP, Motion, etc. Multi-week with an announced schedule of projects.
Yes, I do think so. I think that one of the things that we've done a bunch of these with over the last summer, and we just had to kind of back up and figure out how to structure them. But that's also part of why we're backing up and saying, hey, are people interested in being part of production teams, so that it's not all centered around one person or two people or five people. And so we have to kind of figure out how that's going to be produced. I will admit, in the current structure, I can't keep on running all of them through the Saturdays and so on and so forth. So we have to kind of figure out how we're going to manage that process. And so we're backing up a little bit, taking a little bit of time as the summer starts. But throughout the summer, we're working on rebuilding our production pipelines. We've been experimenting with exactly what you're talking about in different areas, and we're going to continue to come back to those. In Pixelcore, we were doing them months at a time. Over many weeks of process and learning, and we will probably return to that model by the fall. So next question.
Next one's coming in from our friend here on the panel, Victor Cahill, and he's coming in from Brookings, South Dakota. What do folks think about the DMCA really getting on Twitch users and giving strikes for gamers playing music in the background? Twitch sent an email to all users yesterday and created a lot of buzz.
It's the law. Like you can't use. I mean, I gather they think that they're bringing stuff in, but you can't use that music right now in the current structure. There's a certain playing by the rules, so to speak, and that's the law of the land. I think that most musicians would do better to be more lenient. That's what they found on YouTube. Is a lot of musicians were running strikes and they were doing all kinds of crazy stuff. When YouTube kind of figured that out, then a lot of them were tracking or monetizing against those things, and it became a much more comfortable situation. You don't worry about it as much on YouTube. But Twitch is in that early stage where they don't know how to do that yet, and they're going to end up in a lot of lawsuits if they don't sort it out. Jonas and then Victor.
It has been a problem for years. They just start acting on it. There are great solutions to have music, like Streambeats is one where you can just have music and they make money by you listening to it over Spotify. And Artlist is another great solution if you want background music with your own.
Yeah, Victor?
Of course, I agree with you. And yes, they can use a softer hand. Also, Twitch is big enough now that they can make some deals with some of the big majors out there and let some of this stuff happen. What the buzz is that a lot of content providers have been asked by them to simply mute your content or delete it now because this stuff is coming. Of course, we knew it was all going to come, and it was just a matter of time.
The cycle for every live streaming company is to ignore it as long as you can. The record industry doesn't pay attention to you until you have a lot of people, and so because they want that hook to go deep too. So it's good for them to go, hey, let's let that hook go all the way into the stomach, and then we'll pull. So the record industry is not interested in killing these live streaming things when they first get off the ground. They're interested in letting it all sink in before they start tugging and making money with it. And so at the same time, the streaming companies don't want to, they just want to grow audience. And what they know is that if people are frustrated by this, they won't work on that platform. And so they just run it. Both sides are running it as far as they can take it until they've decided, okay, it's time. At some point, the record company pulls the line, and everyone's all on the hook. And so that's what we're seeing. And this has happened every single live streaming company. I'm surprised that Twitch lasted so long, in this process. Now TikTok, took a lot of, they did the right thing by buying up. They spent $60 million on buying up the rights for 15-second clips. That's why that 15 seconds was there, because they bought rights to those clips in that area. The record companies were excited about that. $60 million for basically what they thought was nothing, and then TikTok turned it into a $60 billion company. Now they want more money. Go ahead, Leland, and then Aaron.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, Alex. I'm seeing a lot of evidence of the same thing happening on YouTube. I've received a lot of recent copyright strikes for monetization removal on videos that could be 6 or 8 years old with just little trailer audio on it that may come close to a melody that currently exists. So you do have to kind of watch what you have in your content. If it is something that you can go against and make sure that they're not taking this against your account. It's basically you can't monetize it or it can't be shown in certain countries. So that's where it's at right now.
There's three.
Could go either way.
There's three major levels of enforcement in YouTube. One is track. So they'll just pay attention to it, and you'll say, "Oh, you flipped something, but nothing happens." Then there's they sometimes you don't even get any information about that. The artists just want to know what happened to their music. Then the second one is to demonetize. It used to be that they would monetize your video, so the band could actually get money from your video, pull money from your video, and put their own ads in and everything else. And now they just demonetize them. And then the third one is to strike, give you a strike, and it's a harder hit. And most bands don't do that anymore, except for maybe the Eagles. And so, but it's because it's really considered very old-fashioned, and old thinking and backwards, So you don't see that many strikes anymore. You see demonetization a lot. And so I don't put up videos that I care about monetization, so I don't care. So it's like, I'm like, yeah, I'll play it. And if you give me a bump, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't affect the strikes you have to worry about, but all the other stuff you can just ignore unless you're trying to make money with the ads. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I went through this last weekend where I was hosting a bunch of people from around the world. And one of them was showing a slideshow that had been, the music was from the Beatles. And unfortunately it was live streaming at the time.
Yeah.
Which means I immediately got a strike, and a nasty strike, as a matter of fact, because the Beatles are extraordinarily protective of that catalog. And then I spent probably 20 minutes with Final Cut Pro taking the audio out.
The cool thing is that they now have these tools in YouTube that are fairly powerful that you can cut in and out really. It's just to remove my video, and it'll just pull it out, and it's quite effective. Aaron and then Victor, real quick, with 10 seconds each.
I just wanted to remind everyone that Twitch is actually owned by Amazon, and Amazon has a lot of licensing power. Historically, they've done a pretty good job.
If they just bought
there's
Universal,
no reason they couldn't
solve
fix this.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Victor.
On YouTube, you can check prior to publishing. There's a new tool that'll let you check for copyright. And so just do that. And if you don't want to do it, that's how you can avoid it.
And one of the things we are going to be focusing on over the summer and fall is composition. So whether it's Logic or GarageBand or whatever, we have so many fine musicians in this group. What we want to do is start teaching people how to make their own music, and so they don't have to use someone else's music, as their backdrops. It's not that hard. And again, since we have such a talent pool here, we're going to try to take advantage of that. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Jim Hankins in Chesterfield, Michigan. I'm adding a BMD Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, yay, to the collection today. What would be the recommended initial settings for a Mad in the Kitchen use on a main shot for Dave?
What lens are you using?
I've got a Canon 24-70.
Yep, that's perfect. Yeah, so 24-70. I would probably experiment first with just the film to 709. Coming out of it, we can. That would be the first thing that I would do there. If he's got Windows, you're going to be 56K. Try to stick around 400 ISO if you can. That's where it would be good to be in that process. Shutter is going to be 29.97 with a 180-degree shutter. Those are the basic things. Make sure to do 6K, and if you're going through a switcher, are you going through a switcher or is it direct?
Through a switcher, extreme.
The first thing that everybody does, just always pay really close attention to the black bars across the top and the bottom. So if it's set to 6K, it'll be fine, but that's the black bars across the top and bottom I believe you have to set it to 6K, not to 4K, ironically, but you have to set it to 6K, and that'll actually get it to let go of those bars. But that's the most common problem with the 6K when we're attaching it to our switchers is the very subtle letterboxing of the 17 to 9 versus 16 to 9. It just seems to go to another mode when you put it into 6K as opposed to the 4K. You think that 4K would be the right one, 16 by 9, but that's not it's not. So, all right, next question.
Next one's from Liberty White in Atlanta. We've got a shoot and the modem is over 100 feet from where the stream will take place. What Ethernet would you recommend? We're looking at 150 feet, but what do we need to look out for?
That's not a particularly long run from an Ethernet perspective. So I think you should be, that's a relatively easy thing to do. I think, yeah, go ahead, JJ.
300 feet is your limitation usually.
Yeah.
So you're fine.
So, I think that Cat 5e, is a pretty good, should be fine. Go ahead, George.
Just make sure that that cable is not anywhere where it could be cut, or your ends. Make sure your ends are good also.
Yeah. That's your biggest thing will be someone running over it. So if it's going to run across any paths, of course, if it's going to run around footpaths, you want to tape it down. If you're running across road paths, you want to yellow jackets. They are, they can get crushed and burnt and twisted and run over, picked up. So that stuff is probably your biggest thing. And I would probably lean towards Cat 6, not because you need it, but because why buy long runs of old technology? JJ and then Beiju.
Don't run next to power too. Careful for induction. You'll pick that up along long runs where you have power lines right next to it. Induction will get picked up on those, and then you'll be noisy.
Yeah, go ahead, Beiju.
Yeah, if possible, pull a second cable, or at least have a second cable available with you for the same length if you need to replace it. Also, if you have somebody who can crimp it or repair it, have the tools on site available so you can do it in a few minutes in an emergency.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Jeffrey?
Yeah, just like JJ, power, also HVAC. Don't worry about it. I was going to say about running a second cable, but if anything, have a guy bring in his Commodore 64 and he'll be able to hook you up.
There you go.
There
Perfect.
it is right there. Commodore 64. We'll stream with that.
Next question.
Next one's coming in from Keenan Campbell, and he's in Princeton, Illinois. For all of us that aren't old school media production, can someone post a list of production titles and job functions in Mukana?
I think we can. We probably ought to list them off, but I don't. Again, I think a lot of us do them differently. We have, for ours, we have a producer, an executive producer. We generally have a connection operator or a Zoom operator, depending on how you want to define that someone's going to be there. We have usually a room manager, which is because we have a lot of rooms. So a lot of times we'll pull things in and we'll have 8 or 10 rooms that are going out of Zoom breakout rooms that people have to be sorted about. And you usually have someone managing that process. And then we have, of course, a technical director, which for us is usually the technical director and the director. We don't usually have split that role. A1, sometimes A2, which are managing our audio. And then you have, there can be, it just depends on what you're doing. So then you have cameras and EIC. EIC is our engineer in charge, which is just kind of managing the connections. So then a lot of those are pretty common. I don't know if anyone else has any ones that I'm missing that are new, but those are probably the most primary ones that end up in our budget. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Jason Robert Shaw in Sarasota. I hate sticky rubber. Why does the grip housings on some peripherals and cameras get tacky over time? Why do manufacturers use these materials? Can it be reversed? What to look for to avoid these materials that degrade over time? I found on premium and cheap items.
Heat. Heat is doing that. Heat has them slowly bleed, and it's, go ahead, Courtney.
Anything with neoprene or rubber in it will oxidize over a period of time, and it will break down. Some of the specially foam neoprenes will turn to goo after a considerable amount of time. Look for something that's more plastic-based and not rubber-based. Polyethylene or polyethylene foam is pretty stable over long periods of time without turning to mush.
The function is the thing that makes them not slippery is also the thing that makes them gooey eventually. So it just doesn't last forever. And so the thing that makes them what you want them to be, which is I set it down, it's not going to move, that chemical composition will tend to break down over time. Oftentimes over a long period of time, it's 5 or 10 years, but it is a problem. But I think that it's a physics problem a lot of times of just how it gets put together. Next question.
Next one's coming in from and this is what happens when you go to jump into chat and you lose your window. All right, where was I? Mukana. All right, here we are. Carmi Vineswig.
It's actually Craig's. I moved it for you while you were doing it there.
Boom, boom. All right, there it is. Krakadoki in Toronto, what is the panel suggestion for a USB-C to HDMI cable, 10-foot, or is it an adapter with an HDMI cable preferred?
Go ahead, George.
So I've been using these StarTech cables. They're HDMI to USB, and I've used them in the show for over a month, and they're pretty solid. I'm going to put the link in chat. But adapters are great, but in our case, we needed to go to decimator, so we wanted a cable to actually go from the laptop to decimator.
I've kind of built up around these unis, these little uni adapters. I have both the cables and the adapters. I almost always use the adapters because I want to have a USB-C for power as well as a USB-A for something else. Over in this case, for instance, I just pulled this out of my iPad. I'm using the HDMI to go into the switcher. I'm using the USB-C for power, and I'm using the USB-A for an Ethernet connection to the iPad. So those are the reasons that I want these adapters, and I want those three things. I think go ahead, Peter, and then Charles. I can't hear you, Peter.
I was about ready to paste the link into Mukana. I said there's a set of cables I've had work flawlessly as long as you're doing USB-C out to HDMI in, because they are in fact one-way cables.
Yeah,
right. You can't go the other way.
yeah, absolutely. Charles, and then Beju.
Yeah, I've been using the connectors from Apple. They've been actually working out great, and I try to get the things from Apple just so I don't have any question to ask if it's going to work or not. If it doesn't work here, then it's usually not going to work anywhere else. So it's a safe bet. It's a little bit more, but.
Yep. Yeah, and I went to the Uni ones just to test them, and then they've worked well, but the Apple ones are what we get for production. So the ones I have in my office are Uni, and the ones that I actually use generally are Apple. Go ahead, and Beju.
Yeah, if it's a short run, like about less than a meter, I like the USB-C to HDMI cables, but anything longer than that, I prefer having HDMI for the flexibility of it. Like it's 10 feet, so I can swap the machine out, swap the device out. I don't have to rerun the cable again. That's a big advantage with using the adapters there.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's for going out of a MacBook Air into a TV, non-show critical kind of thing. So that's more the parameters.
And a big thing, again, the reason I started moving to those adapters is so that I had the flexibility of having all the other connections that I may want to use and not give up not give up my USB-C only to HDMI. Next question.
Next one's from Carmi. The pandemic has accelerated the acceptance of telemedicine. Most U.S. insurance plans will now cover televisits. Anyone know of groups working to improve the quality of doctors' Zoom presences? Also, what new gear is available to support telemedicine for home users?
Go ahead, Charles.
I don't know the group, but I actually had that same experience, and now I'm actually helping some of the doctors that I see to set them up. They were like, "Why do you look so good? But can you come into the office?" Right, so
it's
now
not
we're
like they
trying
don't
to
have the
figure
budget.
out. Exactly. So now we're trying to figure out. So every time that somebody says, "Oh, we use this camera and this setup on a budget,"
I don't know how much this is the case, but I did talk to someone who's a doctor who's been doing a lot of telemedicine. I have Kaiser, and Kaiser is their system is actually, I was pretty frustrated at first, but once you get into their app, it's super easy. You have it set up, it has a little thing, you put it in, you go into hold, and you just like boom, 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 boom. And they were talking about the fact that they were actually doing better as doctors because they were able to move through a higher volume of people with actually more detail because there was like no dead time. It was just very, very efficient, for them. And they said there was not a lot. There are definitely people that we have to tell to come in, but he goes, not often. Paul.
UT Health has a pretty good telemedicine program. That's more for the people in Texas, but excuse me, I just signed up for that. I'll find out how it goes pretty soon.
We've been talking to a couple doctors about putting little ATEM minis and the ability to draw on stuff, just to have a little whiteboard so you can explain something to someone or throw some slides in. So if you're having a meeting with them, and that's been something that we've been, that they think might be interesting, just to kind of educate a patient a little bit more effectively. Go ahead, Leland, and then Guy.
VCV, the letter V, SEE.com has been a HIPAA compliant video conferencing system that's been in place for years. You might just want to reach out to them and see if they have a community that you might be able to touch base with.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's someone here on the panel that has done quite a bit of this stuff behind the scenes. It's pretty cutting edge. I know Jonas even developed a custom version of Playout B. It's really cool because I saw this years ago when we used to make DVDs for people. A chiropractor always said a lot of the same things to the patients at the end of the session. And so he's like, man, if I could just, pass him to a DVD, go to, chapter 2 and let it play for 5 minutes, that would be great. Well, now the modern way is Playout B over Zoom, where he can just be done with the session. And he's life size on these screens. Like he made a matrix of I think it's 6 or 9 65-inch TVs. So he's big, real, the real size to him on the monitor. It's a pretty amazing setup. And then at the end, again, he has his custom version of Playout B where he can play out whatever he wants. It's an amazing setup.
I was kind of surprised. That was the one thing that I was surprised at with the app that I had, that it didn't have something playing all the time. Just something looping or not looping, but just random access of tips and tricks. It seemed like I'm sitting here. Anyway, next question.
Next one is from Tyler Roberts in Chambersburg. Experience using Canon 70-200 Cine E lens versus a 70-200 L series in live production. Is the extra expense worth it? Other options to consider for under 5K.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, the biggest advantage with the Cine lens is the focus. It stays in focus when you zoom in and zoom out, while the L series will, you might have it ideally focused at 200, but then when you zoom into 70, it would lose that. So a Cine lens really is really, that's the main advantage I see with the Cine lens.
Yeah, and it's got motors, and there's a lot more to it. Go ahead, TJ.
The other thing with cinema lenses is the focus racking from near to far is much bigger. Many more turns required because Cine lenses generally can focus specifically to a certain point much more accurately than a regular DSLR type lens.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, they call that breathing when you shift focus and you actually see the movement feels, the image feels like it's moving, especially around the edges. You really see it shift. And you'll see that in Ford versus Ferrari, where they did it over and over again just to show the old school effect, because that's how lenses really work unless the manufacturers purposely do it. So like the Fujinon MK series that I've used, you can zoom in, you can focus, you can pull out, and it's just pristine. So that part's called parfocal, where you can zoom in and it'll hold focus all the way across. But the breathing is an apparent thing that when you're shifting from one let's say a close-up shot to a little bit somebody a little bit closer, and you rotate. The big difference with these Cine lenses is as you rotate, some of them will have 180 or 270 degrees of throw, so you can actually turn that lens. And you could go from 3 feet to 5 feet with a quarter of a turn, versus 3 to 5 feet on a 70-200 L series is it's like a minuscule little turn. So you can really do these nice smooth racks with Cine lenses versus the L series that are meant for photography.
Go ahead, Richard, and then Charles.
Yeah, just one of the drawbacks with the Cine lenses is that they're T4.4 versus the L series, which is an F2.8. So depending upon your shooting location, it's probably good to be aware of how fast or how light and dark the room is.
Charles?
I would consider some of the Sigma cinema lenses, the T2s. We have an entire set at the office. And for that, there isn't one that goes from 70 to 200, but the 50 to 100 we've used a lot for sets, and it's been great. So check those out. They're very sharp.
Next question. Oh, I'm sorry, Noah, real quick.
Yeah, just the servo zoom makes such a big difference between those two lenses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Jonas Dottel in Reutlingen, Germany. BMD are hiring someone with experience in computer vision, machine learning, and image processing. What could that mean for the future of BMD products?
I have a feeling that a lot of that has to do with Resolve. It may affect some of their hardware, but I'm going to guess that Resolve is getting more and more into assisting smart removal, a lot of those types of things. So in my dreams, it has to do with their hardware, and we'll see things that are smart there. But I have a feeling that that focuses on Resolve. Go ahead, Noah.
It's just speculation here, but the thought of, we talked PTZ cameras the other day. Imagine that with some sort of AI following and tracking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of people have been working on that, with varying levels of success. But I have a feeling that where they're going, there's so much energy is going into Resolve that I think that would probably be where it goes. But of course, a lot of what they figure out affects a lot of the hardware as well. But go ahead, Charles.
I think the first place that we've seen this is in the newest release for like the rotoscoping tool, that it lets you actually fine tune if you're tracking a face or you want a roto or the whole body or a body part. I believe that's the first place that they started to use a bit of that type of AI for Resolve. I agree with Alex. Also, I would just like them to make a panel that's just HDR.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's just me.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Laura Thompson, fellow panelist here, and she's from Texas. Has anyone heard of the Markey platform for video conferencing? I will be a participant next week in a conference that is utilizing it. I was interested what the differences are between that and Zoom.
I don't know. Has anyone used it? Laura, we're gonna expect a report of what you think of it but yeah, I'm not familiar with it at all. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to tell us whether it was better or equal or I guess it's MVP platform on markeys.com. Looks like that's what what we're talking about here. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what they're doing there. A lot, I have to say, because it's rental and staging is the main thing. It feels like one of the many event companies who have pivoted to some kind of online solution, and the reason that they have the contract is not necessarily based on their skill set in virtual production, but their contacts with their existing clients. That's what we see a lot right now. Is they go back to their existing clients. They have event teams that are desperate to do something. They already know this company. This company says, "Hey, we've got a new product," and then they put it out. So I would say that I'm not optimistic, but open to it being, event companies have not proven themselves to be very good at building event platforms. So, it's like a boat company trying to build a car, or a car company trying to build a boat. It's just they just run differently. Next question.
Another one in from Carmi. He's the producer extraordinaire for today. Suggestions for creating interatrons at a few different price points: 500, 1500, 5000.
It's not hard. I mean, the math is pretty simple. You need glass that's either 60/40 or 70/30 that you can often get at you want to get it thinner. That's the hard part, but you can get fine teleprompt glass, but you can get teleprompt glass at most glass companies in a major city. And then it's just a matter of getting it 45 degrees over top of the monitor, and then how you mount it is really just how you hold it there, and then also how you sock the back so that you with some kind of velvet or to suck up the light so that you don't get reflections. And so those are the three components of the monitor: the glass and the sock, and of course the camera mount is fourth, I guess. Those are the three components, and all you gotta do is figure that out. Now the biggest ones we built were 55-inch teleprompters that rose out of a case. Like literally you could roll it into it. Now that was about $8,000, and you would roll them into an executive's case, push a button, and the whole thing would just open up, and they'd have a teleprompt view in front of their desk. And that was probably almost 10 years ago. So it's the technology is not particularly new, and it's relatively easy to put those together as long as you pay attention to that math. Next question.
Next one's in from David Brady in New York, reviewing a bunch of old video encodes, and some have a horizontal combing / striping issue in high motion scenes. Can anything be done to fix this?
Fixing is a big word. Courtney?
Yeah, you have to find something with a good deinterlace routine, and you will end up with half the resolution because it'll take just one field. It'll take every other line, and then it'll double it, which halves your resolution. And sometimes they'll have interpolators that will try and restore the vectors that it will, so it'll de-stair-step or de-alias the result. So if you look for some software that has a good built-in de-interlace routine, that might be the way to do it.
A lot of us spent a lot of time in the early 2000s and late 1999s trying to deinterlace, and so there was a lot of great tools that would attempt to combine those frames as scaling technologies, to Courtney's perspective, as scaling technologies got better, they just stopped doing that. So the scaling was actually more effective to just take that one field, which is half the resolution, and scale it up than try to figure out how those two fields will fit together, especially in high motion. It was just more effective. So for instance, I don't know what they do now, but we did figure out over time that Apple's iMovie, when you took a 1080i and ran it into there, there was a reason that it automatically went to 960 by 540 because then it was full res, at 960 by 540, but then you could scale it up to 1080p. And again, the scaling technology has evolved much faster than the interlacing. So that's why we mostly do that. So if you can grab one field, you should be okay. And many of the deinterlacing solutions fix that. Yeah. Next question. Oop, I lost you.
Yeah, there's one here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. There's some deinterlaced footage here from Topaz that actually does AI as well. And
you can see
the difference is stunning. I mean, this one, let me see if I can play it now. There it goes. But look at those buildings where those rat mice teeth or comb edges, especially on the building. So I'd take a look at that. Topaz is the name of it.
Yeah, that's great.
Let me go ahead and pause that, cut back over to me. Go to the next question. Craig McFarlane in Boston. Is there a go-to-kit software or web to review? If a guest has enough and stable bandwidth, video quality, and such prior to reviewing it manually?
All right, go ahead, Peter.
Well, you're on a Mac, I have speed test installed, which you can get from the Mac App Store. And that will give me up and down jitter and what am I trying to think of?
The connections. Those are the
delay.
big things. Yeah,
those are the things, and latency. And if you get those four are stable, then I think the rest should fall in place and is not the fault of the network if there is a problem.
Yeah, speed test, and then we just ask, do you have an Ethernet cable? That's usually
wired.
If they don't, what's an Ethernet cable? Then you're gonna have to send something out. So, but yeah, those are the biggest things that we have them do is do up and down tests. And speed test is not the most accurate, but it is accurate enough, and it's conservative. So speed test's performance tends to be lower than their actual performance, which is why we use it. So it gives us a better idea of worst case scenario. Next question.
Next one's from Douglas Carmichael. I remember when the state of Illinois had a stay-at-home order, one of the exceptions was work related to internet, video, and telecommunication systems. With the ability to do so much work remotely, why do you think that they would have had that exception in place? And he's got a note that says, did the remote/at-home production infrastructure come quickly out of necessity when COVID hit? He says, I know that many pro-level editing tools can run well even on laptops.
Yeah, they had to do that because of, there's a freedom of press issue that starts to get in there. So there's a whole question about the constitutionality of all of that, all of the stay-at-home orders, but they weren't going to cross one that would have a bunch of people in the press complain about it. That would have unwrapped the entire stay-at-home order because fundamentally, we can decide whether it was useful or not, but it wasn't constitutional. So the problem was that they were doing something that was unconstitutional, but picking at the people who were going to complain about it in public was probably not a good idea. So that's why they made the exception. Go ahead, Laura.
The other thought I had on that would be with telecommunications would be the actual people that had the infrastructure, because the worst time for the infrastructure to go down would be when everybody needed it because they were at home.
Infrastructure, you're absolutely right. We had internet installed in our locations and everything else, but the press one was mostly to keep them from complaining. Peter?
Yeah, I was going to kind of go the way Laura went, which is one of the problems we had because I've been dealt with large governmental bodies last year. Was they were not prepared for massive work at home functions. Right. All their VPN routings, for instance, actually came back to a single central point in the data center because they weren't used much. And when all of a sudden you had 18,000 people trying to come through that one VPN concentrator, all heck broke loose.
Next question. We're going to start moving fast to try to get to the top of the hour.
Douglas Carmichael. I've seen events where orchestras play a film score live as the film is playing, and many of them, as I've read on forums, carry a video server with the film on it. Wouldn't the telecine transfer / color correction process be a rather painstaking process in itself?
It is. We've worked on those, and it's a painful process to get it ready to go. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, it's a bit of a pain, but you usually don't go from like the negative to the print. You usually have like the interpositive and the internegative, and then you make like the final print that you actually show. The last one that I saw at the Met was the Merry Melodies, and they had the live orchestra, and they actually had a digital projection there, and that was the best way to control it. But usually when you do have a film that you need to have accurate, you do other color grading and testing there, because the way that light actually moves in that space is very different than it goes for home cinema. So,
next question.
Next one's in from Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois. With the Mix Pre 3, is Noise Assist worth the $300 investment, or should I wait for the potential office hours discount code?
Go ahead, DJ.
Yes, it is worth the $300.
Very good. Give us one more week. I'm trying to work that discount code out. So, but if you don't get it by the end of next week, it won't happen. Next question.
Chris Taylor in Winter Park, Florida. Is the chat portion of each day's Mukana saved and possibly indexed and searchable for future lookbacks?
It is, I think. Someone saves the chat out, right? It's Sky, I think, who grabs the chat. Somebody grabs it and puts it somewhere. Like something happens to it. Go ahead, Courtney.
I think Sky scrapes all the links and puts them into Office.
No, that might be just the links. I have to admit that I feel like all this stuff is so moving. I feel like it's it's moving so fast that I feel like we're generating so much content that paying attention to that is not as useful as the questions, which we are working on, keeping more track of. Next question.
Next one's from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. How long before we will be able to get the next gen Mac M1 Mini, and what will it cost?
I bet you incrementally more than the current one, and maybe as early as next couple weeks. So, I mean, that's the rumor. We might get an M1X Mac Mini. So we'll see if that happens. Next question.
Joe Lovell in Pennsylvania. Has anyone tested the Facebook Portal TV camera? How is the microphone / audio? Could I use an external mic for better audio quality?
Go ahead, Ken. And Guy, I'm going to have to hand it off to you. Go ahead and go 5 minutes in or whatever. Just try to move through the questions quickly and then go to AWS. And thanks to everyone. I have to go into a meeting. So take care.
To answer that question, I have tested it. The audio and the mic on it aren't very good, but if you connect it to the ATEM, then you can use your normal audio and mic that you have set up, and so you can have it that way. But I've got one, the audio. Well, I don't find the audio or the microphone on it is very good.
Yeah, I found the same. The audio is not very good on those. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one, which is coming in from Harwood Ferguson in Boulder, Colorado. Feeding music from Mac to USB mixer to second computer via USB. Mixer as mic and Zoom results in frequent audio drops, hisses, etc. Even using original audio. Monitoring on second computer, sound is clean. Tips for better results, feeding music directly into the Zoom mic. Jeff Keithley?
Use Dante if you have that capability between the machines. I'm not quite sure. Is it talking about going into the one machine or actually feeding from machine to machine?
It's a good question. Hopefully he can answer that in chat, but I'd agree. Dante, Todd, you want to take a shot at it?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you mentioned the USB mixer and feeding from the Mac into the USB mixer, I'm not exact. It's hard to know without the equipment, knowing the equipment. Right now, I'm actually feeding my mic into one audio interface and going light pipe or ADAT into another interface with zero latency, and that's all very clean. So it seems to me like it might be an issue with either a driver with your USB mixer or something like that.
You just popped into Mukana. They just popped in machine to machine. So yeah, Dante, and do Dante via as a clock source if you don't have Dante hardware, and then bridge across between machine and machine via Dante. Super simple.
Courtney, you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, if he's using two USB channels in there, they may be competing against each other. So try going analog into the second mixer and see if that solves your problem, and it'll reduce the traffic on the USB bus.
All right, we're going to move on to the next one. Patrick Huber in Poughkeepsie. Thoughts on projectors to integrate into theatrical plays held in small, medium-sized black boxes, mainly for an audience attending, but from the archival camera, it would be great to capture a clear image of what is projected. Any suggested brands and specs to look out for? Looks like Jeff's got his hand raised. Go ahead, Jeff.
The new Panasonic lasers are amazing. 30,000 lumens. I don't know what your budget is, but they're amazing. And they're smaller now in the latest version. So those laser projectors are just amazing output.
Anyone else? All right, we're going to, Beiju, go for it.
Yeah, I'll second the Barco UDX ones. They're really solid, rugged. Same for the Christie Flame or Scarlet series. The thing with most of them is they need to be really bright if you want to catch them on camera. So that's going to be the base thing, balancing the ambient light and the projected image. And that's going to be a challenge. So you're going to have to work on that.
All right, we're moving on to the next one. Another one from Douglas Carmack. Will you be discussing music theory in the composition tutorials? I've been an electronic music producer for 7 years. He's got a link to a couple tracks and would love to learn more compositional skills. That would be an Alex one. I would imagine that we could set that up as a second hour request. If you jump into the Discord and put it in there, I'm sure we can discuss that on the Audio Tuesdays. Another one coming in from Douglas Carmichael. I've seen several events where symphonies play a film score live to picture, and the film company send a media server with the film on it. Is the telecine/correction process a painstaking manual process, automated, or both? And would you color correct specifically for outdoor viewing?
I think we did this guy.
Sounds familiar. I'm going to go ahead and move past it. Unless there's anything you want to add, Charles? Because I don't remember the color correct specifically for outdoor.
Yeah, he changed the last part. Yeah, usually the test that we've done in the past, if it's going to be an outdoor, we usually do test a few weeks in advance around the same time that you are going to project. It gets increasingly difficult if it's going to be outdoors, and the projectors just get increasingly more expensive because of the light output and trying to get the accuracy out. So, yeah, sorry, that's all I got.
All right, another one from Douglas Carmichael. What are the preferred tools for color correction/grading on the desktop? It seems Resolve has a lot more powerful color correction tools than FCP 10. Charles?
Yeah, if you are going to focus on color grading, I would start with Resolve because that is what it's made for. A lot of the other tools, such as like Final Cut or Premiere, they've added those tools slowly but surely. But if you're going to focus on color grading, it is the one to go to. That is free and it's the most user-friendly. There are other ones like Mystica and Baselight, but those are usually for people that are already in the industry and aren't starting from ground zero. So if you're starting from that point, get the free version of Resolve. It'll get you 90% of the tools that you get from the studio version.
Alrighty, last one coming in from the first hour will be from Joe Lovell in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Follow-up, what if I don't have an ATEM? Can I go into the TV via USB? And this was in regards to that Facebook portal TV. So follow-up, if I don't have an ATEM. Yeah, you can feed, let's see. So it acts as a USB. Let's see, how does that go? Paul, is Paul still on the panel? Nope.
I don't think the...
Paul.
What was the question, Guy?
So Joe Lovell is asking if she doesn't have an ATEM, how could she take the HDMI from the Facebook portal, the output? You know how it does the AI tracking. So she's asking how to get it into the computer.
I don't know. I just use the ATEM. I haven't tried it the other way.
I guess just a generic, capture card, just anything like an Elgato Cam Link or something along those lines would do the trick. I think that's how some of the folks like John Ilston were getting it in. Jeffrey?
Yeah, you'd have to have a computer in between or something like that. But I thought the portal also had an HDMI out to go
That's
to
what
the
we're talking
TV.
about.
Yeah,
So
it
it could be in
does.
the meeting as a, so it acts as an attendee, or you can feed it out, the HDMI out into a switcher, which is what some of the guys did for like their B-roll shot. So they'd be in the meeting as them, but then use the HDMI out to feed in. I believe that's the way that John Elson had it set up. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the AWS questions. First one is going to come in from Jim Hankins, and he says, Alex L. and others have mentioned in the past that they've forgotten to shut down EC2 instances, which resulted in unplanned AWS charges. Have you heard of AWS Instance Scheduler? It's designed to help address this issue. Perhaps a brief discussion on it would help others avoid surprises. So Jim, you want to tell?
Yeah, so in my past history, typically my infrastructure didn't need this type of capability, but since joining this group, I clearly see the need to dig into these kind of things, and it's a pretty slick offering. It is essentially a serverless option that will work with CloudWatch and DynamoDB and Lambda, a very low cost per month. I think it's like $9 or something like that, to keep watch of your running instances. You can assign schedules. You can run them in multiple regions. You can have multiple schedules. You can limit the starts and stops based on instance types. You can do partial automations, like I only want to start an instance if you want to spend really heavy, or I only want to manually start my instances, and I just want a guardrail to stop these rather expensive instances at a specific time and help save you some money. So I'll put the link in the Mukana here, and check it out. It's pretty slick.
Jonas?
The one thing why I think as long as I'm experimenting with machines and working on concepts, I probably would use that and like shut them all down at 12 o'clock or something. But as soon as you start production, I wouldn't want anything turning down machines randomly. So yeah,
so
something
I don't
to
see a
keep
whole
in
lot
mind.
of questions in Mukana. So what we'll do first is just kind of go around the panel and see who's using AWS, who wants to jump first and talk about a recent production. And Jeff's raising his hand. You're up first, Jeff.
Oh, you just snuck that in. I had my hand up to talk about CloudWatch for a second, but that's fine. We can roll. Jim, great find on that, actually. I have looked at that. I tend to run a couple of scripts and such to kind of keep track of those things. But yeah, CloudWatch is quite handy to make sure you're not running over, especially after I got a couple of those surprise reserved instances that hit me. But those are things that you live and you learn, and I have found just this past week we've been pounding our VPC, past 2 weeks actually, and I have found that the billing reminder when you open up and look at the dashboard is a great reminder also that you need to be on top of it, especially when you're in the thousands and you're like it goes up every day substantially. But we tend to leave ours running, just like Jonas said. I don't want scripts that automate and shut down things at midnight, for instance, or midnight 01, because I may be wanting to keep certain infrastructure up and running for a period of time. I like to, if we're setting up, like I say, if it's a one-day show and we're doing a 2-day prep or something of that nature, we'll turn them on and don't turn them off. I won't cycle them at that point. Once it's working, leave it working. It's worth it, and we write the cost in as that. I don't try to maintain an hour and test and then come back, because it costs me more money to have to reset it, and if there's a problem, I just would rather it just be running and it working, and that way whenever we get there to the show site in the morning, it's all set and run. Now if we're talking 100 to 120 machines like I was doing a couple of weeks ago, those are the kind that we would script to run up and down at that point, but those were basic machines. They weren't exactly our infrastructure part, the processing engine and things like that.
Yeah, thanks for that. George, you want to go ahead and carry on with a little bit of that?
I just want to piggyback off of Jeff a little bit as far as he's probably have one of the larger business models. using AWS on the overall office hours. I think what a lot of people forget is once you start moving to these workflows, you have to start making that part of your business model and actually billing for it. That way, you're not worrying so much about sucking up that cost. So once you start moving to these platforms, you don't necessarily have to explain to your clients, you know, in depthly what you're doing, but you need to make it part of your business model and build it as part of your project. That way, if you're going to leave a machine spinning up for a 7-day show run, it's built into the cost of that. So a lot of us need to start using, you know, billing it as such versus worrying about these machines being on for 7 days at a stretch.
Makes a lot of sense. And Liberty, how are you using AWS in your productions, or have you used any of these instances in a show?
I haven't yet, but that's why I'm here today to hear from everyone, because we've been doing a lot of like fundraisers in different places. I'm still on Zoom, haven't all the way. Actually, Jonas worked on a project we did earlier this month, and actually, yeah, you spun it up in AWS. Because what happened was there's supposed to be a video playing out in another breakout room, and you can't play out to a breakout room or however we had it set up. So he spun up a vMix instance and then was able to live cut all the people. It was just great. And I'll let you jump in, Jonas, to just explain how you did that, because we still need to talk through that.
Yeah, we had multiple servers running. There were some rooms that were running, then the vMix instance. And the cool thing is, if you have a vMix instance prepared, that was like my backup instance. Because if anything fails locally, I can still be like, yeah, of course, in 2.5 minutes, I have a vMix instance running in the cloud that can do playouts and all that. So that's pretty handy to have just as a backup to not rely on local machines.
And sorry, just to add to that, so in one room, in the main room, we were managing the DJ and the event happening there. And then the breakout room, they wanted something else interactive happening at the same time. So just to put just some context around that.
All right. Anybody else on the panel want to raise their hand? Tell us about how they're using AWS. Beiju, maybe? Come on. I see that. Softball coming to you.
Yeah, not using AWS as much yet. We've been using Paperspace in the past. We've been really testing AWS now. One thing that we have learned is that sometimes some things that are easy locally, like, okay, we just need to run an extra instance machine there, just want to patch something up. You just have to think it through in the cloud, because especially if you're using NTI, or you need to think about how many channels, where you're going to route the audio, how you're going to delay it, how you're going to manage it. That sometimes needs a little bit of thought process, but if you have it, it's so much easier to spin up extra instances, do stuff up. AWS is a bit more of a lift compared to, let's say, some of the ready to use options, but you learn a lot more from there. That's a big thing with there.
And George, you want to add on to that?
No, let me just give my current workflow. So right now I have 2 vMix machines, main and backup. And then I have 4 Zoom machines, and I have a micro machine for a timer, which is iris down, that I'm using with a custom multi-view to give the client, you know, start time and stop. Obviously 2 PowerPoint machines on the cloud also, and then I'm using 2 Macs locally for SRT for Keynote. What I just started testing a couple of weeks ago is Frame.io's file transfer. I mean, it's not necessarily Dropbox, but when you do a record and you're done for the day and you have 60 gigs of media that you need to get off of that server, and that gets back to the whole idea of costs, because once you have 60 gigs on your instance, you're going to be charged for that, and you're going to watch that cost go up daily. So file transfer by Frame.io, it's not necessarily, well, I talked to them about it. They said, well, you can't really use it, you know, not necessarily for the purpose, but I find that to be able to pull down 60 gigs in 10 minutes off of AWS, that's probably the best way to go right now as far as getting your media down from AWS. But that's pretty much my workflow. So, you know, 2 vMix machines, a couple of Zooms, definitely 2 PowerPoints, main and backup, and I'm controlling those by Internet Pickle. So I'm having clients control their PowerPoint slides. You're able to send back an actual frame grab of the PowerPoint that they're using. So that's been helpful, not only on AWS, but also in Zoom. That way you could actually, they don't have to share. You could actually give them feedback of the actual PowerPoint, feed it back into Zoom. But that's pretty much my workflow.
Are you doing this
And Jeff?
solo or? Oh, sorry, I was just jumping on
Go
that.
ahead, Liberty.
Are you solo in this, or is there someone else producing in the cloud with you, just with that workflow?
Some days I'm solo, but for the most part, I try not to live dangerously. So again, getting back to building out your projects, I normally have like 4 people. We have a producer, myself, I do all the cut-in. I have someone handling the two PowerPoint machines. So it's at least, the minimum is 3, but I try to have 4. I tell clients we need to have at least 4. I try to treat it like if I'm doing a local production in the cloud. So I try not to skimp on it because things could go wrong.
All right, Jeff Keithley.
I would agree with that too. Do not undersell yourself with making sure that you have adequate resources. That is a very quick and easy way to get yourself into danger because you don't have enough people monitoring the machines or able to handle the workload itself. So be wary of that. Also, George brought up something as far as moving that content. Keep in mind also, for those of you that are unfamiliar with AWS, inbound traffic is usually free, but outbound traffic is going to be charged by the gigabyte. And it's a minuscule charge, but it is something. So if you're dumping 200 or 300 gigs or terabytes even, which I had to do for an event, it's amazing how fast that grows up too. And so you're only talking about 1 or 2 streams going outbound, maybe 10 or 15 if you're doing a bunch of Zooms like we were. But it does add up when you start copying those really big records off, and just keep those numbers in mind when you budget.
Jonas?
Another thing how I started moving my files is mounting in a 3 bucket as drive and copying over to there. And what I wanted to ask you, George, when you use Frame.io, aren't there also on AWS? So do you actually pay outbound traffic? Or could that be a nice way around outbound traffic?
I thought about it, but I doubt it because it's 2 separate services. But what will happen, I find that the transfers are way faster because obviously you're on the same backbone. But it's a good, again, I have your same setup also, Jonas. I have some of my AWS S3 bucket mounted in through CyberDuck on all my instances. But I find that Frame.io's transfer, again, especially if you're working on a project where clients need to get it right away, I just have Frame.io set up where I'm constantly dumping and there's no issues and they could pull it down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, on that note, George, just for those listening at home or at work or on their commute, what kind of speeds have you seen when you've ran speed tests at home or at the office versus in the cloud?
The speed test in the cloud is insane. I mean, obviously, what 20? I don't even know the numbers right now, but who's counting, right? I mean, that's one of the beauties of being on AWS is that you don't have to worry about bandwidth, and especially if you have a gig up and down at home and you actually get in 900 up and down, it's a breeze.
Well, as I recall, you stuck a screenshot up in Discord, and I believe you were hitting 10,000 megabits. Is that right?
It was pretty fast.
Yeah,
I don't have it up right now, but yes.
Yeah, so if you're getting 900 versus 10,000, I mean, transferring, terabytes of data starts to become pretty quick when you're getting 10x the speed. So some of these instances are pretty quick. I'm seeing about 3,000 megabits per second when I run a speed test. That's up and down. I don't know how you
normally
got
what I
10,000
see also. Yeah, I'd like to know how you got 10,000. I want to move there.
Yeah,
I don't think it was 10,000, but it might have been that Mac metal that cost me a whole lot of money. Luckily, AWS was gracious enough to wipe it off my slate.
Yeah, you and me both.
All right, anybody else before we move on to questions want to tell us about how they're using AWS for productions? All right, we'll go ahead and take the first question here from George Kennedy. It says, what are the best combo remote desktop and AWS G4DN instances for vMix and Zoom when considering a cloud build out? Teradici, as in parenthesis, AWS instance, nice AWS instance.
He knows the answer to this. What's he asking the question?
I know, I'm just kind of tossing it out there. I mean, okay, so So here's the thing, right? Obviously, it's not necessarily contention, but we've been going back and forth. Whether Parsec, obviously, Jeff, you've always told me to stay away from Microsoft Remote Desktop. I still use it for a lot to copy and paste, go in between. I find that Teradici for vMix is pretty solid, and the fact that you can also attach your Stream Deck directly to Teradici is wonderful. Lately, I've been using Tucker had recommended this. I'm using Virtual here and LogMe and Hamachi to connect all my. I mean, once you get into connecting with Hamachi, you could pay I think it's $50 for the year, and you have all these 32 VPN connections. Once you start connecting all of your machines locally and in the cloud, I mean, I started work yesterday and was controlling my vMix machine at home over Hamachi, and it was a thing of beauty. So once you start testing all these things out, you find quickly that the cloud is really a beautiful thing. But going back to the instances, Teradici, I know a lot of folks have had issues with Nice, or I don't know. It's some time-ish for those of you that's using Nice, and that could be problematic. But I try to use those on my Zoom machines, and those work pretty well. But again, sometimes you have disconnections and so forth. So Jeff, I just wanted to toss that out there, because I know you use TeamViewer also, but anyone else who want to jump in and share what you're using for connecting to instances?
Yeah, good, Jeff. Then Beiju.
Yeah, we definitely use TeamViewer quite extensively just because it's familiar to us for anything, and I have a large contract with them, so it just makes sense. We were doing 120 machines with TeamViewer a couple weeks ago, and they were all in the cloud, and I can't think of anything else that would have been as easy to handle, to display those, to use them, to be able to jump in and out machines so fast. Parsec it's great for, I think, smaller instances or smaller implementations. It does have a very, I admit, it actually has a very good interface whenever you're using it for production. And it's very fast, very, very good video rendering and everything like that. That's where TeamViewer does not. So that's whenever I'm looking at the mixing side of things, or something that's running the video side that I'll really want a good preview, that's where I lean towards Teradici or TGX. TGX by MacDon is another option, but it's easier to get into Teradici because it's already built into the system.
And on that note, Jeff, can more than one person be logged in with Parsec at the same time, or is it just?
Yes,
okay,
with
so that's one of the
Parsec
differences.
you can.
Teradici,
you cannot. No.
And that one, TeamViewer.
TeamViewer, no, like dozens. It doesn't
yeah,
matter.
because it's pixels at that point, right?
Is it the same? Is it the same session on TeamViewer, or does it open a second session?
Well, I know, like for instance, and many times we'll run, say for instance, our switching system, which is usually VisVector Plus, and so the first person that's going into that is going to be over Teradici, and then the second person that may need to have access, or the backup switcher, backup TD, he'll come in via TeamViewer, and then if I wanted a third, he'd come in via TeamViewer, and it just shows up in the little box down there. You can see who's all logged in if you have separate accounts for them. But yeah, I've had as many as like 6 or 7 into one machine with no issue. It's no issues because TeamViewer is handling all the bandwidth at that point. Now, fighting for the mouse, that's an issue. So you have to communicate. That's a big issue.
That's a nice feature of Parsec, that you can not allow people access to your mouse and keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually just have people that can view the content but not manipulate it.
Now you could set that with TeamViewer also. You can get permissions like that if you wanted to. But there's more efficient ways to do a multi-viewer, well, a lot more efficient ways. I would rather send the multi-viewer out via NDI and then pipe it out through our Sienna engine, for instance, or if I wanted to send it out through Zoom, which we've done also. So it just depends.
All right, Beiju, then George, and we'll start to hit some questions.
Yeah, instance-wise, I had good luck with the NVIDIA gaming instances. They have the NVIDIA drivers built in, so that's one big step out of that. And I'd like to use No Machine because it lets you have a second display, and with a little bit of work on it, you can get both displays at full HD on auto start. So they work nicely. Plus, you can have multiple no machine instances open on the same PC at the same time without it affecting the display on the remote machine, which is nice. You can set it basically to not change the display like with Teradici, that you don't have to lock that display to 1080 or make sure it's 1080. You can basically resize it on your local PC without it affecting the remote machine. And one thing I always do is have a second way to get into the machine. So if I'm using no machine or parsec as the primary, I normally either have real VNC or TeamViewer also installed on the same system in case something happens, because with no machine, again, you need the public IP or FreeMyIP or something basically to access it. The nice thing with TeamViewer, real VNC, or any of the other options is that because they call out, you don't need to know the public IP. You can normally get into it at the same time. Parsec's great. The only problem right now, as far as I'm aware, is you can't see two displays on virtual machines yet. I don't think they fixed that bug yet. There was a bug in that you could do it for local machines with the paid version of Parsec, but you can't do it on virtual machines yet.
So on what I do want to say locally here on my Mac, I could only open up one instance of Teradici. If I move over to my Windows machine, I can actually open up as many. Is it up to 3, Jeff? Or so
as long as your machine will handle it, I think you can keep on going on a PC.
This is the 3930, so I've been able to open up at least 5. So you could open up multiple windows of Teradici, not connect to the same instance, but you could connect to different instances by opening multiple instances of Teradici. So that's the good news on the Windows side. If you locally want to monitor, like I have the guys monitor 2 PowerPoint machines connected to Teradici, that could happen locally or any Windows machine.
And that's exactly why we use TeamViewers, for that reason. And for what Bijou also said too, is we could take even though it's a 1920 by 1080 on the remote machine, I could window that down and still see the full 1920 by 1080 without it affecting the remote machine. Teradici does not allow you to do that, but I could then take a 4K monitor and place 9 different 1920 by 1080s, so I could monitor 9 different machines at once. I'll try to find a picture of our new master control to show you guys.
I remember seeing some of those pictures where you had this quad display that I've got right here with, I think there was 4 in each quad. So 4, 8, 16. There was probably more than that, wasn't there?
Yeah. Quad is cute. Yeah.
Quad is cute.
We're thinking it's available on Nice as well, right? From what I've heard from Greg Gibson, that's what he's doing with the Nice app, is being able to put them onto his displays as well. I found an app for PC folks, just to throw this out into the mix. If you don't have that capability on your PC, Windows Power Toys is available out there. It's made by Microsoft. It gives you the ability to put 4 separate sections into your broadcast screen with an overlay of a full screen underneath. I've been using it quite often in my productions, and if anybody wants to try it out, just go check it out.
All right, let's grab this question from Liberty White and see if we can answer it. She's coming in from Atlanta. Is there an ideal machine for cloud production? What's a base, medium, and optimal computer? Price ranges would be helpful too. Come on, George, tell us about that 3930 you got.
Liberty, are you speaking about cloud machines or local machines?
Local machines. So what local machine wise? I know you're in the cloud, but is there like this one?
No. I have two Dell 3930s on recommendation of our good friend Jeff. So that's I love it. And the reason I went with those, I'm very capable of building a Windows machine, but I think you get to the point where, like right now, if something happens with my 3930, I call Dell, they could send me a replacement or a loaner until that's fixed. I would say go with something. I personally went with Dell because of that factor. I could get it replaced in an instance. And again, you could build out your machine, so you don't have to go crazy. My machines have RTX 4000s in them. You could go up to 5000, but that's going to add another $2,000 or so to the machine. But I would look at the Dell line of machines. Don't skimp, because you're going to run into the same problems again. You want to keep your streams up, and your hardware make sure your hardware can support what you want to do.
Yeah, and so you went low, medium, and high. So Jeff, are you coming in with one of each, or are you going to go straight for the high mark?
You know me well, guy. The Dell 3930s are actually fantastic. I mean, you're talking about under I have some of ours were under 1,000. So it's really hard to beat that kind of price point as a workstation. We have a dozen of them. They're for 13 now, actually, but they are very just workhorses, and they're small form factor with the 1U if you have a rack and things like that. But I think that is a good medium. I mean, going with more power than that, that's an i9 9900 CPU with say 32 gigs of RAM, and the P2000 card, or 2200 now, which is the baby Quadro, works just as well as the RTX 4000. Now I don't see any difference in that. The difference that, like George said, the RTX 4000 or the newer 5000s, that gives you more capabilities if you're running locally vMix or something of that nature that needed that GPU. But you don't, for doing cloud stuff, you don't need a lot of power. I have some old quad-core i7s that are just as capable to run just as many team viewers or just as much local viewing capabilities or control capabilities as what those Dells are. So it really doesn't, and we just put a slew of Mac Mini M1s in for the same reason, and they didn't work out as well as I wanted them to, but they served a purpose for the event that we did. So it doesn't really need much because you're just basically small amount of data back and forth. I mean, a simple laptop, and I use my iPhone honestly for that better.
Yeah, Liberty, you want to follow up with that, and then we'll go to Beju and George.
I'm curious, Jeff, what happened with the Macs, the minis that you said like they didn't work out as well as you wanted them to?
All right, are you ready for the Mac story? Okay. Mac M1s, I bought one of them to test out. So we had this big event that we needed to be able to support. It was in the neighborhood of 150 to 160 virtual machines that we had to support. We needed to have eyes on every one of them because every one of them was running a Zoom meeting. The problem we ran into was our Dells were tapping out at about 9 team viewers per. So I couldn't get Dells fast enough for this event because it kind of expanded really fast. And then as we were looking at options, it's like, okay, well, let's look at the M1s and see what they could do. So I bought one, we tested it out. We saw 48 virtual machines on it. I was astounded. I was like, these are amazing. So I said, let's buy some. And I bought a bunch. I bought eight of them. And so we put them in the racks, got them all set up and everything. Then we went live. We have 4K monitors attached to each one of them. Once we went live, we were barely able to get 6. And I was just really disappointed. So what the guys figured out, and this is going to a 4K screen. So I just emailed myself the screen so you could actually see it. Can you give me share capabilities?
Yep, hold on a second.
And I'm trying to make this a little, and unfortunately I'm on a big screen, but this will give you an idea. Okay.
Your mic's open, Jeff.
So this is the monitor wall, small one. So you can kind of get an idea of how many monitors we had set up, and this is how we were building out everything. So this is so we could see, and we were shooting we tried to do 16 per 4K screen. We ended up at 12, and that was a comfortable way. What we ended up doing was we would go ahead and set up each computer actually talk to one monitor as one-on-one, and then we had our KVM talking to the second monitor on the Macs, and our KVM's at our KVM, so that way we could control every machine individually off of just one keyboard and mouse, and that worked out really well. After we got the right adapters, that took 2 or 3 Amazon orders to make that happen, because the monitors or the KVM wouldn't necessarily see the display port output that we had adapted, or it would only see the KVM. It was a mess of stuff. Finally got all that worked out. What we figured out, and then once we kicked them on and we went live, is we just couldn't keep them stable enough. And so what my guys figured out was knocking them all to grayscale. And so every team viewer was then at grayscale. It was a lot less color information, a lot less bandwidth. And we have a gigabit here, gigabit down, and we touched on it a few times too. So that was another problem we were having to mitigate with some of those problems. But that's where we ended up on the M1s. So they're going to a different house soon. Dell's on order.
All right. Hopefully that answers your question, Liberty. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question from Douglas Carmichael. What would be the best way to protect from bill shock when learning AWS? A separate prepaid card connected to the AWS account? Jonas?
I would say set yourself a budget limit. I forgot some instances this month, so when I suddenly got an email from AWS, you have reached 99% of your budget, I knew something was off, but I set the budget on a level where I'm still like, I can pay that. And yeah, if you use a card that doesn't have sufficient pay, AWS might get mad at you, and that might hinder you getting instances in the future. So I would try to just use budgets.
All right, George.
Budgets is good. The AWS console on your iPhone is a good way to keep track of where things are going and you know your daily costs. Because once you spin down an instance, within 10 hours or so, you get an update of your billing. So I would even, I mean, it's kind of silly, but I would even set an alarm for 11:30 at night or before midnight. Like I have my phone set up to do not disturb at midnight. So after that, you're not going to get notifications. So set yourself a notification just to make sure that you're not going to leave instances running.
All right, I got a quick question for John Barker, and he's been kind of silent here, but he's got an awesome Here to Record Discord where there's a cloud production area. What are you seeing kind of the sentiment of some of the folks that are going from traditional switchers to even looking at the cloud? What are you kind of seeing, hearing?
Good question. So far, it's been sort of quiet in there because we just created it. I just created it yesterday, actually, so it's early days. But the actual channel about cloud production specifically I created yesterday. But for the most part, not only in the server but outside of it, something that I'm really struggling to convey to people is what it actually means to do this stuff in the cloud, whether that be a customer or somebody who's so used to the hardware switcher. The first question really is why, and then after that, I found so far that I haven't quite got the words yet to fully explain how useful it is, but maybe some of that is just because I personally am still finding how useful it is myself.
Yeah, I think if a lot of people knew the power of what's up there, and especially the cost. I mean, some people are thinking, just thousands of dollars, but I mean, my bill's like $200 a month, maybe $400 on crazy months. It's not that expensive, but then when you look at the depreciation of some of these high-end graphics cards and machines, I mean, I could rent a G4 8X for what, $2, which is a 64 gigs of RAM. I mean, it's like super powerful. Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about that, about how powerful the machines are and just the redundancy and things like that?
Redundancy is the biggest part for us. Is everything that I could do on 10 machines, I could do at 20 because I could just start up again. And then I have immediately redundant paths everywhere I need to. Take that a step further is I could have 2 different data centers with exactly the same gear running within seconds, minutes, and so that's a big part of us. And those data paths those data centers are completely different areas of the world for that matter. So that redundancy is a big part of it for us. In the end, we're just using somebody else's computers. So it is that, and it's just an interface to that. How well does it work? How low is the latency? Those are all factors you have to weigh to find out. And then, of course, the cost, because if you're going to leave it on for 24/7 for a month, it may or may not be more cost effective just to buy it. That was what George and I both ran into, is to do that reservation for the M1s that they came out with the instances. Amazon came out with the instances for the M1s. I was really excited, but you had to have a reservation in on a different configuration that wasn't even the M1. That basically just was kind of like an interpreter of sorts, from what I understand. And that reservation was $80 a day. And so by the 2 weeks, I'd already paid for an M1 by the end of the month, I'd paid for 2 or 3. And so without even running the M1 instance. So those are things that you just have to kind of weigh. It's like, how important is it to have it? And that sometimes the fastest way of doing it is not always the best way.
Yeah, I was noticing the pricing on Mac Stadium is so inexpensive compared to what AWS charges. So for those of you that don't need the interconnectivity, so a lot of the ways that we're using AWS is to have a contribution machine, a cutting machine, and then an encoding machine. So they're all linked via NDI. So we need the PCs to do it because that's the way that it's cheapest and easiest to do in AWS. But Paperspace is one that Beju's used, and Mac Stadium I know Tucker uses. Leland, then George, then Beju.
I might have a really strange question here then, because I've been playing with virtual machines here on my PC to build several instances per se in my own network so that I can monitor breakout rooms from here. My question would be is, could you then possibly put VirtualBox onto a virtual AWS build and then build virtual machines off of those cores and memory allocations that you've set aside and save yourself the extra instances by building one with several inside of it? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, you could do it, but does it make sense? Because then you're putting all your eggs in one basket. No, and it's not about the cost. It's about your eggs. You're putting all your eggs in one basket.
I see what you're saying.
Same way.
Well, I wouldn't put them all in one basket. I get what you're saying there, is rather than having an individual machine for each, but it's very similar to what I did here. I had 2 machines. I ran into 6 breakout rooms with virtual machines in the tow. So I had 2 on each PC, creating 6 machines for myself. And I was just curious if you're firing up several instances and that extra cost is involved for each instance. If it wasn't a necessity to have this ultra redundancy, could you not, just run virtual machines inside those AWS instances to save money?
You can, but to get the performance, you're going to have to up the cost of the original instance. So by that time, if you went into like an 8X or 9X, by that time to get enough power to efficiently run VirtualBox, you might as well just start out with a 1X or 2X instance to start with redundancy.
Jonas?
Okay, I guess I see where your point comes from. Okay.
Jonas,
And you would run virtually a virtualized hypervisor, which doesn't seem to like it. There are use cases where companies use VMware on AWS, but running a hypervisor on top of another hypervisor seems kind of redundant. And what you could do is you could just downsize the machines that you normally use. Problem right now is that you can't go lower than a G4DN 2XL if you need 1080p from Zoom. So if you could go lower, you could use just a smaller machine from AWS instead of creating them yourself, managing them. You could be like, instead of buying 1 big, you could buy 4 small.
Thank you, John.
I just wanted to make sure folks are not missing what Jeff is saying, and he has mentioned this before. So you can actually, like my vMix machines are G4, I think G4 XLs, but you could power those machines up and down. And he had mentioned that to me, and I've lived by that since then. You could create one version instance of vMix, but you could actually power it up and down, meaning you could change the actual
the instance
Jeff,
type.
can you explain a little bit the instance type? You could change that as you go along, the CPU. So you could bring it up and down. Also, Jeff, I wanted to really quick, because I know we're going to run out of time. Because a lot of us are using vMix, can you explain a little bit where vMix is going to max out on an AWS instance?
4XL. There's no reason to go higher than a G4D and 4XL. After that point, your CPU speed is going to remain the same no matter how many cores you throw at it. So at a certain point, vMix is just going to tucker out on how much it could use just because of the way it's written, how many threads it can take advantage of. No matter if you give it 96 different threads, 96 different CPU cycle threads, then it's not going to make a difference. The 8XL, you get a larger storage SSD attached to it, but that's like the only reason I ever go to an 8XL if I need to make sure I'm doing SSD recording directly to drive. But most of the time 4XL, and I never really mess with below. I just stick on 4XL.
Yeah, and that instance type, something to be aware of is you're throttling. If you build, let's say your show at a 2x and then come showtime, you want to go to a 4X, be aware that it's going to recognize that the hardware's changed and it's going to ask for your license key. So be aware that you want to have that and be ready for it. I'd even be doing it days before, to thoroughly run it through. Because it's like, who changed my head? Like it boots up, it looks the same, but it is a little like bewildered there for a minute when you first make that instance type from a 2X to a 4X. And thanks for that information on the 8X, Jeff. But isn't there also a 50 megabit back network, Nick, on that on the 8X?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. But why does that matter? You already have 25 gigabits.
More. All right, Beju?
Jeff, one question on that. Like you said, vMix maxes out on the 4XL, but does it make a difference, like if you have a lot of audio plugins or something running in vMix as well, to have the extra cores to basically maybe they'll shift on to the other cores rather than having giving vMix the full capacity of the 4X if you switch to the 8X?
It's a good point. You would have to test it and see. Then that's only if those audio plugins are actually multi-threaded and able to use those extra cores. This was information that was shared with me and one of my clients via Martin. And he was just like, look, it's just, you're not going to get any better going up to a 96 core machine. It's not going to perform any better.
So on that note, Jeff, if you have contribution machines, or now I'm already setting up the answer to the question, but if you had vMix callers coming in, would you separate out that activity? So some people will do a contribution machine, cutting machine, maybe even a machine for recording. So do you segment everything out? Because knowing what you know as far as the machine's just going to not take advantage of all that power, do you just offload duties?
9/16, 5/8, ½ inch, right tool for the right job. So cut it down to what you need to use and don't push the machines harder than you have to. But yes, breaking it up to specific responsibilities is a great way to give yourself not only fallback capabilities, but it also gives you a little bit more strength in numbers. So, and answer your question, Guy, yes. I personally don't. I know a lot about vMix because I help my clients set it up and build out, and I sell those services to them. But I don't personally use a lot of vMix workflows in production because we're using different tool sets like the processing engine, the Sienna processing engine, and also the larger switcher interface of the VisVector Plus. So I don't have to do multiples. But one of our clients, the Drone Racing League, they had 6 different vMixes that were all tied together, and basically how he set it up is he had 3 or 4 that were set up as MEs, and so he had 6 different pilots coming in for each one of those looks, and so he would set all the looks up and bring in those callers via, that was SRT and not vMix call, but he'd bring in the SRT into that one vMix, and then he'd move to the second, then he'd move to the third, because they were doing heats, and so he had them set up like that, and it worked really well for their workflow because it gave them the feeling of a multiple MEs type switcher setup, because they were just going from instance to instance to instance with a master instance as a switcher. And then there was another one, I think, that was doing audio. So we've moved them since then to VisVector Plus because you could do it all in just one suite at this point now. But that was how they broke it up. Last week, or actually, gosh, it is Friday, isn't it? It was this week. I was in Miami doing a show, and God, we end up with like 16 instances running with at least 10 of those as vMixes. So there was a different client doing corporate productions, and it was part of that was redundancy. So there was a primary and a backup of every single type of vMix that was set up. But that's what they had multiple languages going out, so they had different responsibilities in each one of those. We had a processing engine tied up in the middle of that, a router tied up in the middle of it, but it's all in the design of redundancy and spreading out your load so you're not actually affected by just one area.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to move on to Jesse Mills' question, which we kind of touched on, but maybe we can add on to it. He asks, what is the best way for multiple operators, 2 to 3 people, to access a single vMix instance in the cloud?
Yeah, I guess looking for those remote desktop options and things like that. So I think we already heard a lot about that. I mean, I've experimented with No Machine and AnyDesk. Haven't dipped into the Teradici stuff yet.
Beju and then Jonas.
Yeah, like I said, using the remote access software helps. One other thing that I have done sometimes is have a second parsec instance running with no keyboard mouse, but controlling like the audio faders using something like central control, using a physical hardware. So have the audio guy just having faders separately physically over parsec. Other option is, like I said, primary operator over parsec, secondary operator over any of the other remote desktop options.
Jonas, did you? Oh,
What
is he
I
showing?
started using is getting the multi-view down another way. For example, this is a MITK product where I can have all my NDI sources in the browser and then use something else to control the vMix instance. Basically decoupling, like having access to the vMix instance from being able to control it. So people have a Stream Deck and get a multi-view. In this case, they can even choose what they want to see, then control it instead of log in onto a machine. But then you need to integrate it even more.
That is so cool. Is that NDI Connect Pro or what are you using there?
Yeah, that was NDI Connect Pro.
Cool stuff.
While we're talking
Jeff?
about that, that's something else too, is you could absolutely use NDI capture, and it has a KVM built in. So you could have one machine going into the cloud that you're remoting into through with whatever source you want to, and then use NDI Studio Monitor on that machine that you're locally remoting into. And then from that machine, you could actually control any of the other machines that are running NDI capture because it has a built-in NDI KVM function. Actually, we use it locally quite a bit ourselves, except on the Mac.
Alrighty, thank you for that. Next one's coming in from Rupert McRae. AWS uses GoToWebinar for its own virtual events. I just dropped into another Amazon event on GoToWebinar, and the video was 4:3. Does anyone need to get better, or does Amazon need to get better at virtual events? And we'll go to Jonas.
They really use GoToWebinar even if they have their own thing? Because that would be super strange. Because in theory, is it Amazon Chime? I think it's Amazon Chime. I think they should use, but yeah, maybe they need some help.
They're not eating their own dog food? What do you say about that,
Jeff?
Jeff?
They definitely are. I was just on a meeting Monday with some of the higher ends of professional services, and I was like, oh we're using Chime? You guys are the only people I know that do. And they're like, yeah, we have to. So, yeah, they're using Chime. I don't know why they would be seeing it. It may be somebody else that's associated with it for GoToWebinar, but that is terrible.
Alrighty, next one's coming in from TJ Asher in Minneapolis. What is George using for the remote presentation control, or also now and forever known as the Internet Pickle?
Actually, I just answered him in the chat. Is actually Internet Clicker. TJ, to be honest with you, there's at least, I want to say 10 of them out there right now. I've kind of settled on using Internet Clicker because they've been doing more updates. But there's a lot of controls right now. But like I said, you kind of got to pick your battles, and Internet Clicker is doing it for me right now.
Alrighty, next one from Douglas Carmichael. Live Nation is planning to outfit 60 concert venues around the country with live streaming capability. Without a separate engineer to mix the stream audio, how would they probably handle mixing the stream? Balancing groups, matrices from the front of house console, wouldn't sound in the room affected. Jonas?
Maybe they actually use a different engineer and just have a local or have a central location where all the engineers go to and they just remotely connect to the streams. That would be cool.
Yeah, Jeff, didn't you have some folks that are working on like the F1 events and they were doing something along those lines remotely?
Yeah, it's
audio
completely remotely. So I was just trying to read that again. It's like, so 60 concerts were left. I mean, it's absolutely doable, but it would most likely be better to do it with something like Remotely Possible from Andrew Broughton that has the ability to tie in actual sound consoles together. We are currently building bigger audio controls in the cloud using Harrison Mixbus and the NewTek/VizRT NDI VST plugin, which allows us to bring audio in and out as a VST plugin. So you can use Mixbus or DWAR, Reaper, anything that can use the VST plugin type of infrastructure. And that allows us to have like all kinds of controls like you would normally have on a digital board and run plugins at the same time. So we've been really happy with it.
Beijing?
Jeff, any news about if they're going to be releasing that VST plugin from NewTek?
Support@newtek.com. Email them again. It's still a possibility, very much so.
All right. Another one coming in from Jason Panks in Nashville. Anyone looked into Azure versus AWS? Jeff?
Yeah, I definitely have. It's got a lot of capabilities. MLS is actually using Azure with the BizVector Plus and also Sienna Processing Engine doing very well with it in their local productions. They're not doing like big matches and such, but they are using it. I think it just depends on what you're familiar with. Their IT people were more familiar with Azure, so that's why they went that way. But for me, my familiarity was AWS, and so that's why I kind of stuck with it. And even though I learned different things and we've done some of the deployments in Azure, I don't know, it's just like a little bit different, same prices roughly.
Yeah, Jonas?
And AWS is really committed to like the broadcast live streaming workflow. If you look what they have just released in the last month with CDI and all those stuff, I think they, if you have a cloud platform that actually works or wants people to work in live production on their system, that's probably the one I would choose.
All righty, next question's from Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. Jeff, which adder KVMs do you use?
That is the DDX series, the kind of medium level that they have. It's not a true IP based KVM. That's our next step in our master control, but it was something quick that we had to do. So we use the DDX, which we also have in our trucks. It allows you to do up to 8 different workstations on the DDX10. And then you can have 2 control stations and then 8 different destinations. It works fantastic. I mean, it's under, I think it was like under $4,500 or $5,000 for the system, but it's well worth it whenever you can just sit down at one keyboard and mouse and just control any machine you have in your truck. It's well worth it.
That's at the top, very top of the league, right? That's the most expensive thing you could possibly buy. No. Okay.
No. They have the true IP based ones that are they're way more expensive. You're talking tens of thousands to get into high counts. Wow. But you're also talking the ability to carry, and you can control 100 different machines. So it's a big difference.
Crazy. All right. Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, so we'll wrap up these last 2 questions, or 3 questions. John Foltz in Sullens Grove, Pennsylvania. Newbie question. How do you load the software to an AWS instance, and how long does it take? George and Leland, was that a yawn, or? Okay, George and then Leland.
I can cover that.
Okay, Leland, go ahead, and then we'll bounce to George.
I was just in the process of building one right now while we're sitting here, and if I push this button, most of the server build will build almost instantly. So it's not really a matter of getting the build and instance up on AWS. It's really more a matter of what software you need to put on that build. So obviously a vMix build is going to require vMix plus some other softwares, maybe sound or NDI or a mixing software or anything of that sort, and anything else you're using to control the broadcast. So it really comes down to building that first ISO, and then you can usually, can you not, Jeff, copy any build that you do on the network? I'm new to the AWS builds. I do virtual builds on these machines, so I would expect same things capable.
So
George. Yeah, George.
So real quick, we have covered this extensively. You might want to go back to the Discord and check for those answers, but the quick answer is, and Tucker will tell you, use a Microsoft Remote Desktop. Build your entire folder locally of all the software you need for your instance before you even turn on the instance on AWS. And then you just click on that folder and hit copy and paste it onto your AWS desktop and load your software from there.
All right, last one really fast. Bo Cordell, have you covered how to mount the second drive when running a G instance? It seems like it doesn't automatically appear when I boot the machine. George, go.
Disk management on Windows, and you partition it from there.
All righty, and last one, Douglas Carmichael. How would you compare vMix on Windows to Mimo Live on the Mac? George.
Me personally, vMix is an AB switcher, which I'm used to. that's why I use vMix.
Nice. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you guys for watching. And TJ, I believe you've got the con, so we'll go ahead and wrap this session up. Thanks again, panelists. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and everybody for watching.